Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and today we're staying on Chambersburg Street in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Remember, if you like the historical content we've been putting up on our YouTube channel, please click the subscribe button to see more of our videos. Today, we're going to talk about another artillery shell in a building in the town, part of Gettysburg's visual battle damage. And this particular artillery shell is a Schenkl shell lodged in the second story of 221 Chambersburg Street. It's the David Troxell house at the time of the battle. David Troxell was the grandson of John Troxell. And if you watched our video on John Troxell, the first settler of Gettysburg, and he's one of 71 grandchildren. Now, David Troxell lived at this location at the time of the battle, and he had a really nice, commodious basement or cellar. Now, beside the Troxell house was a group of 2.5-story apartments referred to as the Warren Block. Thomas Warren built this series of buildings in 1859. And at the time of the battle, 4 families lived in the Warren Block. We are fortunate for this particular artillery shell in this building. We have 2 different civilian accounts, one by Sarah Broadhead from her diary, written in 1863 and published in 1864. And then there's an account by Elizabeth Gilbert, who lived with her family at 213 Chambersburg Street. And both accounts describe the artillery shell. Just a little background on the families. Sarah Broadhead and her family lived in 217 Chambersburg Street at the time, and 215 was the family of George Myers, and 213 was Jacob Gilbert, and of course his wife Elizabeth, who has an account of the battle, and in 211 was Owen Davis and his family. I should mention that Owen Davis was the engineer on the Gettysburg Hanover Junction Railroad. Now, Owen Davis's wife was pregnant at the time, and she gave birth to a child in September of 1863, which she named Annie Meade Davis. And of course, that's going to be the subject of one of our future videos, Battle Babies. Now, I should also mention that George Myers has a son in the Union Army at the time of the battle, and that son, David Gilbert Myers, would be captured and die in Andersonville prison. But these houses apparently did not have cellars at the time of the Civil War. The Warren Block had crawl spaces, which I'm sure since then have been improved into cellars. But all 4 families in these buildings ended up with the Troxels in their large, commodious basement during the fighting. And according to Elizabeth Gilbert, in her 1908 reminiscence, during the battle on the 2nd and 3rd day, the 4 families living in the Warren Row gathered in the cellar of Uncle David Troxell, making about 22 people taking shelter in that cellar. They stayed there until 10 o'clock in the evening of the 2nd day and were there on the 3rd day. They spent the time in listening to the firing and keeping up each other's courage. And while they were in the cellar, on July 2nd, an artillery shell hit the building. And according to the account of Sarah Broadhead, again, written in 1863, about 4 o'clock p.m., the storm burst again with terrific violence. It seemed as though the heaven and earth were being rolled together. For better security, we went to the house of a neighbor and occupied the cellar, by far the most comfortable part of the house. Whilst there, a shell struck the house, but mercifully did not burst, but remained embedded in the wall, one half protruding. So this account suggests that that artillery shell in that building, which is just to the left of the turn in a rain spout up near the top of the roof, has been there ever since the battle. Now, Elizabeth Gilbert actually discusses this also on her account. She said that when the shell struck the building, Miss Sally Heckenluber was very nervous. She was the maid of the Broadheads. When the cold shell struck and entered the house, no one mentioned the fact, though she, Mrs. Gilbert, and a number of men heard it enter the house while they were in the cellar. They were afraid it would excite the women and children to talk about it. Fascinating. So we have two confirmations of that shell. Now, there's kind of a problem with this shell, though, and that's the fact that if we look at early photographs of the town, that front of that house is obviously not there. And like many towns, we have Sanborn fire insurance maps, and that front of that building is not on the 1912 Sanborn fire insurance maps. As a matter of fact, the building is shown a little bit farther back, and the explanation is simple. Somewhere around 1920, I believe, a two-story front addition was placed onto the original house, which sat much farther back, and the Schenkl shell was removed from the original building and then replaced in the more modern addition. So although we have good documentation for this artillery shell, its location and placement has been greatly altered.